So I think we'll have a jam-packed session. We've had a massive response. Bridie and the team in Taste for Success have sent out videos, I think, and they're in process at the moment for between 400 or 500 videos will go out from the last few series. So they know there's a small bit of editing to take place. So I think once those elements are done, they'll be sending it out. And I know certainly some of the companies I've spoken to have had a few people around their laptops trying to take some insights and learnings. So sharing the learnings across the organization. So Bridie, are you live with us? You are?
I'm live with my virtual background in place now.
You're looking, really, as always, as professional as ever.
Look, you do what you can, don't you, with the little that you've got.
There we go.
But I had you on in the background just listening while I was furtively trying to sort a couple of things out. And it is interesting, Eamon, this whole thing about the consumer and understanding your consumer, and putting, it's that thing about putting on the different hats, isn't it? Viewing things from different perspectives. I'm trying to think, is it De Bono's 6 Hats that talks about understanding the situation from different personas, different perspectives?
I think that's very true. I've been in a lot of situations where you can really benefit from someone provocative in the room, really putting on the different hats, whether it's a dark hat or a more optimistic hat, but because we're all creatures of habit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we don't like, we don't always like to be challenged. Good morning, Richie. How are you? We're all together. Look, I was on I have to tell you this.
If you're going to tell us a funny joke, now is the time to tell us the funny joke.
I'm not going to tell you a funny joke. I did hear you talking about the Cork Kerry thing and how RTE lost its technical connectivity, and we had a major launch yesterday, and guys, with all the will in the world, with everybody working so hard behind the scenes, with everybody stressed to the max, working in isolation, trying to bring this thing together, we had connectivity issues. It was just right in the middle of it. Morning, Paul, how are you? It was quite traumatic for those of us. I wasn't in the background, but I was absolutely feeling their pain. I was on the panel, so we just kept going, and and it came right in the end. But look at it's technology it's so fickle. This is what I feel about it. It's a fickle thing. It's a fickle thing. So
I think, Bridie, one of the benefits, the recording of the sessions we've done. And certainly for us to be able to share that, I know we've a lot of entrepreneurs that tuned in this morning. We've people at the start of their journey, and we've some businesses less than 10 million as well as people up to 20, 25 million. And I think we're coming at it from the point of view of just trying to navigate or make people aware who are at that earlier stage of their businesses, for those who are up and running, just to remind them of a focal point, or where to aim for. And I suppose for people who are up and running a long time, it's just to remind them, keep doing it, and I think that's the thoughts I would have. What about yourself, Eamon? Would you think that's the aim, or would you?
No, I think it's very true. My reflections on what we've spoken of thus far and what we'll talk about again today is that we're really only teasing people because the topics that we're covering are so vast. But there's hopefully a little nugget in each of the presentations, in each of the conversations, that people could at least reflect on, and it's a door into a whole set of questions or whatever that may be required to be answered. Because you won't get all the answers in such a short space of time, but it might prompt a next step. And that's relevant whether you're small, medium, or large.
I think so. It's just to try to prompt the thought, isn't it? Just to try and that's why I certainly think with whether it's an NPD process or an NPI process, where you're launching into market, it's just what are the questions you need to be asking to make sure, are we okay? How are we fixed? Sometimes you have to take a chance as well. It can't be all 100% thought through, but certainly where you can, and ask more questions. I was chatting earlier on and I mentioned to Lorraine Heskin, I said that I had a particular group of people I'm mentoring at the moment, and that they'd bought a piece of equipment, and they just wanted to get going. And I said, what are we making? And they said, something, we'll find it out as we went along. So certainly, while they wanted to get the equipment bought, I was encouraging them to think about who's the customer, what's the occasion, all that kind of good stuff, So, but anyway,
it's that thing about why are we doing it, who are we doing it for, and what are they going to get out of it? And it's that there is a wonderful YouTube thing that you get sent to about Simon Sinek. I don't know if people have seen that.
Yes,
you can Google it. It's free. It's Simon Sinek, and it's about why. Why are you producing this service or this product? And just clearly defining that. And it's the 3 W.
Morning, this is Deirdre Fahey. Can you hear me?
Yes, Deirdre, we can.
Hi, Deirdre, we can hear you. Yeah.
Good morning. How are you doing? Sorry, I was just testing our earphones here.
Absolutely, you're all good this morning. Yes.
Lovely stuff. All good.
Good. Are you coming to us live from Naas?
We are. Yep.
Fantastic. Okay.
And you're
brilliant.
in uniform. Oh, that looks really nice.
Lovely stuff.
Cheers. Thanks, Deirdre.
That's great. So just stay with us or whatever you want to do. Fantastic. Yes, so it's about understanding that. And again, you brought up, Phil, I could hear you in the background earlier about the brand. And, it is such an emotive thing. But our brand has to talk about what we do. It has to tell people, ideally about who we are, or that there's a connection. And that's something that often takes time to work through. And when you get it right, it's a very powerful weapon in your business arsenal. And you'll see that once, I suppose, an organization, a company, a producer, an SME understands that and understands what its brand is about and how it can package and promote that effectively. It's a huge opportunity for them to grow their business.
It is, and I think one thing Eamon alluded to last week, which was that about creating good partnership, understanding the category plan, but also working in a partnership with the buyer. And Eamon, you mentioned about trust with the buyer. I do think sometimes companies are guilty of trying to make own label product, or and they don't quite hit the mark in terms of taste profile. And I think, when you look at the snacking category, over the last 20 years in Ireland, that, we had a staunch traditional snacking brand, and that's all been expanded into all different flavors as the population grew and changed its flavor profile, flavors and preferences. But I do think it's about partnerships with buyers and understanding the category plan, because I certainly remember a number of years ago when jalapenos arrived into Ireland, and we first got them through pizza topping, etc. And people were doing their global travel, and now it's an everyday item for most people's fridge, or certainly I'd say 5 to 6 people's, 5 to 6. I don't know, Eamon, what would you think? Would 5 households out of 10 have a jalapeno on the back of the fridge?
maybe far back.
Oh dear. So we've got another 8 minutes, and this is the last of our series, which I'm sad about, because it's been we've had some great interaction, great opportunity for SMEs to log in and hear our expert panel and our experts on the I suppose some information. And as Eamon also said, and I know I've picked up from Paul and Richie in previous presentations, all we can do is give a snapshot at this point in time. It's just, here are things we think that could help you, things that we've learned, things that we've experienced, and trying to share that and pass that on. And hopefully we may, we'll, after these sessions are finished, after today is finished, Phil and I will be talking about what's next, what can we do next? Is there a next? Hopefully there is. And how we can continue to connect through, this pandemic via technology, as wobbly as it might be on occasions, but we're mastering that. We're learning our skills and building our competence in this, and how we can help, businesses and particularly SMEs, artists and producers, to respond and keep their business going, keep their business alive, even if it's just in a small way, until things improve. So
I think, Bridie, to follow through what you're saying, is that certainly I know that Taste for Success, with your research in terms of career pathways within organisations,
yes,
I think that's throwing up, and I know that report is due to come out before Christmas, but I certainly would say that the insights, I think when shared with organisations, to give them an idea about how to put employees on a pathway, and what particular skills are needed, because there's no denying that you can see a huge explosion around digital marketing. You can see that whole creativity, innovation. It's just going to become more and more exciting for those who want to be operating in that space. But
yes,
similarly, there's a huge requirement around people management, all those elements. So it's I certainly got a snapshot of part of the report, but I'm looking forward to when that's launched, because I do think it'll bring great insight to a lot of people in the SME sector, how to mind your talent, as somebody would say,
Yeah, and it's very challenging. And some of the things that we're doing, that Taste for Success is doing, is that we're running weekly 1-hour workshops on a whole range of topics. And if you Google Taste, you'll see them. They'll be on our website. We're sending them out on social media, etc. So these are more about upskilling. So we're trying to, make available to SMEs and their employees remotely a whole raft of upskilling programs weekly, and they usually run on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So they would be what we would term, transversal skills, the soft skills, leading teams, just a concentrated workshop with a training provider, an expert in that particular area. And then likewise, we've had a lot of people asking about Excel, because so many people now have to use Excel and are required to use Excel in ways they've never used it before. And at the strategy launch yesterday, one of the technologists was saying that Excel is an extremely powerful tool for any business to use for data analytics, analyzing, measuring, and that of all the tools that are out there, it's the easiest one to get to and one of the easiest, let's say, to master. So we're hoping to continue to run those workshops. We usually run the Excel, PowerPoint, and Word in 3 sessions. But then at the next level up, where we're talking about strategy, we're talking about talent, we're talking about your business, your brand. This is where we host these discussions at this level of expertise. And I see that Mark has joined us.
Hi.
Good morning, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
and
morning, how are you?
Look, it's 3 minutes to go, so I'll pass over to you, Phil.
Okay. Just want to check, Richie, you okay you can talk to us, yeah?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Are you okay with your, can you hear us, or have you technical difficulty?
I can hear you perfectly. Once you can hear me, I don't mind.
And you're sounding very well. That's all we'll say, right?
Yeah.
So we know, we were just chatting there earlier on, if the Cork-Kerry match during the week lost its communication due to rain, you're permitted the odd 2-second interval, right? Okay.
Thank you very much. Well, the result was right there. That's the important thing,
So you're all looking very well this morning, and it's great to have you here. We're about to kick off in about a minute and a half. We'll just allow some people to come on in. Roisin O'Shea unfortunately couldn't join us this morning, so Roisin has been a huge contributor to us over the last number of months as we prepared for this session. So I just want to thank her for her commitment and help, because she brings huge knowledge. So please God, we'll get to do another round of webinars, and we'll have Roisin involved again, because certainly she's huge experience from PepsiCo and some other food businesses here in Ireland as well. So she certainly has brought that. Lorraine, you're ready for action, you are?
I'm ready to rock, Phil.
Did
Born ready.
Did you compile 10 questions outside of the parameter there for Mark this morning, yes?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Hi, Mark.
Thanks,
Good morning.
How are you, Lorraine?
Good, thank you. Very good.
are you going to lowball him now, you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Do that.
That'll be all the important stuff.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So,
Yeah.
Phil, as we said earlier on, it would be great just to back and forth, rather than me going into a soliloquy when you come on to my quarter.
Yeah, certainly we'll try and do our bit. So just as we're at 11 o'clock, we're just launching. So good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to our third webinar in the Facing the Future series. This morning's session is Innovation Through Leadership. And we're very fortunate to have a very, very accomplished panel. We have Mark Mellett, Vice Admiral, Head of the Defence Forces in Ireland. We have Lorraine Heskin, CEO and founder of Gourmet Food Parlour. We have Eamon Howell, expert in FMCG and operations. We have Paul Ward, Head of Innovation in BIM. We have Richard Healy from Rex Consulting, a leading finance consulting business. We have Bridie Corrigan-Matthews, Head of Taste for Success Skillnet. Good morning to you, Bridie.
Good morning.
And we're being hosted this morning by Trendin, so thank you for that. So we have a poll just going live at the moment, which is, does your business currently have an innovation process? So we're encouraging the participants or people attending this morning, if you can populate that, because this morning really is about setting out our I suppose our stall in terms of where innovation starts or how it comes about. And we've asked for Paul Ward and Eamon to kick that off. But prior to that, we're asking Richard Healy to take us through some recap around some finance, because we do know that finance is the engine room for businesses. And it's very, very important that we have the finance right. And I think, to be fair, from the feedback we have received from the last two webinars, that people have certainly been, I suppose, very appreciative of the guidance from Richie. Bridie, would you like to say anything there this morning before Richie takes his presentation?
Yeah. Look, if it's okay, just a quick few words. Obviously, welcome to everybody, and a very special welcome to Lorraine Heskin from the Gourmet Food Parlour, and also to Vice Admiral Mark Mellett. We're honoured to have you both here, and also to have Paul Ward from Bord Shugawarra back with us, and Richie Healy and Eamon Howell. We are very grateful for your time and the energy and the effort that you've put into helping us to deliver this excellent Facing the Future series. As Phil has said, we're getting tremendous feedback, a lot of people logging in, and we sincerely hope that the information that you're getting from our expert panel will help you in your business. Taste for Success is here to help. We have funding for 2021 confirmed, so we're absolutely delighted with that. And if anybody needs to contact us, they can find us at info@tasteforsuccess, or just go to our website, tasteforsuccess.ie. So look, this is the final of our three-part series in Facing the Future. We have a tumultuous time ahead, not just with the American elections, but also with Brexit 50 days away. So that's a scary thought. And of course, the sector that's going to be most greatly impacted is the agri-food, food, drink, beverage sector. So we will do everything we can behind the scenes to help businesses, to help artisan producers, SMEs, and larger organisations to respond, upskill, whatever we can do online, we will be here to do that. So we just need to hear from you, and Phil will be asking questions and polls during the course of this presentation. So on that note, I'm going to mute my mic and let Phil and the team take over. So thank you all again for being with us this morning. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks, Bridie. Cheers. So we'll just push on. I'm going to mute my own mic now in a moment, but I'm just going to hand over to Richard Healy of Rex Consulting. So, Richie, good morning to you, and we're going to leave it to you. All right.
Thank you very much. So maybe the next slide, please. I suppose where I'm coming from, and this is principally my guidance, and I've been in the finance world for more years than I care to remember, but it's observations from other companies I've been involved in, and I suppose 5 things I'd encourage you to consider. They're my thoughts, and I'd be interested to hear later from Lorraine if these are ones she thought about when she's setting up the business day one, and whether they're ones she looks at going forward. One is a dirty word called COVID and once in a lifetime, hopefully, items like that. But there's something outside of our control. These are things I think we can control ourselves. So over the last number of weeks, we'll have talked about marketplace knowledge. That will have come in particular from Eamon and from Paul. And it might be worthwhile going back over their presentations in the last fortnight to see where they've come from. But in particular, keep capturing your data. Understand what's going on in your competitor. Find out, talk to your buyer. And something that Eamon referenced last week was, you're as good as your last as your last product, and you need to be early planning for your next offering, and that's also critical because you can't sit on your laurels. You might find that you have that you've invented Coca-Cola, but somebody's going to find something that's better than that. You're going to find something else. Second one I have is proper business planning. I used the analogy last week of a famous Corkman called Roy Keane, and I think really where I'm coming from there is if you fail to prepare, then you can effectively prepare to fail in terms of business. If it doesn't work well, it's not going to happen for you. Third thing is important is timely and accurate performance data. Without data, you cannot succeed. And fine, people might consider finance to be bean counting, but if you don't have an idea what the beans are, if you don't know what's happening in your business, if you don't understand the results, and see why your actual performer for a month or for a quarter is worse than that's a big problem. Worse still, if you don't even have a plan to start with. But then you know, unfortunately, can't join us today. Critical that you build an ongoing relationship with your bank, the business, and more importantly, that as you go along, you will hit speed bumps. Keep them involved, keep them in the loop, so that if you do hit a problem, that they're aware of it, and they will help you. And Roisin and her team, or any other bank, like Roisin's a Bank of Ireland, I'm sure AIB or any of the other banks that are out there at the moment will offer help. And I suppose to go along with that, you've got to look at cash management. Initially, when you set up, you will underestimate, take it from me, the amount of money you need to set up a business. But longer term, as a business starts running, how are you going to physically get your monies in? And we all know that the large multiples, they set your credit terms, you don't set yours. And however, on your supplier side, they will set their terms. And typically, initially, they will not match. So you will end up paying money out sooner than you're getting it in. The thing I talked about last week was, listening. And you need to have a batch of trusted, what I would call trusted advisors. These include, but they're not limited to, banks. A business advisor, which could be a good finance advisor, it might be a good mentor, using the likes of Board BIA, Use Enterprise Ireland, the local enterprise board, and I think in particular in the sector we're in the whole food sector, you need to have quality and compliance expertise. Gone are the days when you can rock up with a new product and find, whoopity-doo, this is going to be acceptable, and the first one that comes out causes a sickness incident. You might as well just shut down and go and find something else to work on, because you're gone. So without quality and compliance, that is critical in 2020, and is going to get more important as we move on. So the next slide, please. I suppose I have one additional one. And what is it? It's really to continually repeat, review, and challenge what the 5 previous steps were. And you might find, and maybe Lorraine will talk about this at some stage in her presentation, the 5 I have mightn't suit your marketplace at all. You might decide, well, in fact, we've done really well on our quality and compliance, but we now find something else there. We found a better way of getting our data. But until 1 to 5 that I have outlined in the previous slide, until they're up and running, and I believe working properly, you won't succeed. But definitely you should challenge them. You should review them. And if you have something you can add to it, and again, your trusted business advisor or the likes of local enterprise or sure that you actively, but don't listen stupidly. That's it for me.
Thanks, Richie. Appreciate that. I think, look, I suppose the key element here is just the best guidance possible is take your advisors on board and stick to the 5 and repeat. And I think it's about being consistent and persistent in that process. Just stick at it, because it's, and I'm sure we're going to hear loads from Lorraine and others later. Just before we move on to our next speaker, I suppose one of the key elements this morning's presentation is around innovation, the process, why and how. And there's 2 quotes here, which is innovation is a feasible, relevant offering. And I think it's for people to realize, that can be a product, a service, or a process or experience with a viable business model that is perceived as new and is adopted by customers. And that's from Gijs van Wolfen, and he's a global expert in terms of innovation. And he has some smashing videos there on YouTube, etc. But it's only for some place for people to go and listen, because it's from listening to others we can get some great ideas, and which will help us all. Innovation ideas and products are becoming increasingly important to counter the price-orientated competition from low-cost producers. And I know this one is particularly important for Paul Ward, because Paul is certainly in the BIM innovation process. They've outlined the stepped approach about how they're trying to make sure people don't go in the door to customers with a Me Too offering. They're trying to make sure they're going in with an added value offering that's relevant to the customer. So I'm not going to steal any thunder from Paul Ward, to be fair to him. We have some polls going on. We've just launched the second poll there, and we'll give you the results of the first 2 polls in a few moments. But I'll hand over to you, Paul, if that's okay. So I think you need your next slide.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Thank you very much. So Phil has just described, I suppose, the reason for innovation. But just like any other business process, there's also a need for an innovation process within your business. And in the seafood sector, we're advocating a 5-step process, all the way at hunch, which is your idea initially, all the way up to commercialize and scale. So why have this process? So I suppose from our perspective, we see 3 key elements in terms of the why. And the first one is that it manages your commitment in terms of cost and time, in terms of bringing a new idea forward into the marketplace. Because significantly, as you move through that process, the costs are going to increase, and also the time input from yourself and from your staff members will increase. And significantly, at stage 4 with pilot, it's going to increase exponentially because you're now actually in production. The second idea, or the second why for an innovation process, is it just helps you to gather your ideas at an early stage, particularly stage 1 and 2. And it's only progressing on the basis of data supporting that to move further. So it just brings that objectivity to the process so that you're not just jumping straight into pilot. And that's the third one, is that you don't go from, you have a great idea and you just jump into pilot production because it appears or seems that this is a great idea. And you've made that investment and now the product isn't working or the service isn't working in the marketplace, and you've got all this cost tied up in maybe machinery. So a lot of time spent at 1 and 2 really gives you a robust insight into the viability of bringing your idea forward. So what we see in the seafood sector is that we're getting an increasing number of projects at 1 and 2 and fewer at 4 and 5. But what that's allowed for is a greater return on investment. And Richie had spoken about making sure and rechecking and data and reconfirming every time. So that by the time they're going into pilot and commercial production, their return on investment is much clearer. Nothing is absolute, but it's greater degree of accuracy. So we just move to the next slide, please. So one of the tools we use in this is stage 1 in Define is we believe in what's called a project vision or a challenge statement, and that's just to capture the idea and to put some structure and thought around it. The idea is to basically, reduce any risk that you just take that idea and move it forward quickly. It also allows you can share this one document with your team or with your staff members, and it expands your idea a little bit more about why are we actually going after this project. You can apply timelines, etc. on it. So the whole idea is this can be applied to any member of your staff. Have an idea, it can be around utility management, it can be around your fleet management. It doesn't have to be just at your product development. So you use this and it just means that it's a place that a member of your staff can just write down and give it to you. This is my thought. So we just go to slide 3. Next slide, please. Thanks. So when you take that idea, I've jumped straight over to number 3, and in terms of our stage gate process. I suppose what we always say, this is the last stage before you go into pilot production. So you have to have your concepts very well tested. And what we say is that, you can have a couple of solutions or a couple of concepts, but you want to actually just mock them up, make a prototype, and you want to bring that to your customer base, and you want to validate it, and you want to go back so you could reiterate this 4 or 5 times till you get the correct, I suppose, match with your customer needs. Because once you move into the minimum viable product, you're moving into pilot production, and that's where you're going to increase your cost base hugely. So in summary, what we would say is that an innovation process is just a structured framework to help you gather all your ideas and only bring those ideas into production that make financial business sense for your business. So I'll just leave it at
Paul, if I could just ask you one question there, just to help some of the people on the line this morning, just in terms of solution concepts, artifacts, pretendo types, demos. Could you just briefly maybe explain that a little bit more, because there's certain terminology, and what we're talking about here is we're talking about an artifact here is where, am I correct in saying that's where we literally try and make it maybe in a test kitchen or on the kitchen table at home? Is that particular stage, or is it pretendo types?
So solution concepts is just something that you have sketched out on a piece of paper, written them out, you might even draw or whatever. So artifacts then is where you're kind of, you might just mock that up with a bit of clay, or it could be Lego, or depending on what you're into. Pretendo types is you're actually into your kitchen development.
Sure.
And that's where you're doing your MPD. You can do it in your kitchen, and your demoing then is like, well, how would that look now? You've got your product, but you need to package it up. So you're even demoing your package type. So you're not investing in packaging, you're just borrowing from somebody else. You're taking packaging that you can borrow, whatever means you can acquire it. And then, you're maybe wrapping that as to what the label would look like. You've printed it out on your own computer. So it's all low cost prototyping.
Sure. And in the demo space, is that where you might be producing ultimately that kitchen sample that would be as close as possible before you run it down a line then for a pilot?
Absolutely. And even a demo, like it's like the demo is before you actually commit to even giving your order and packaging and all the rest.
Absolutely. Okay.
You've demonstrated it, so you're going, okay, now I'm clear. The packaging style, the size, the font, everything looks okay. So I can go to your packaging supplier and your feedback in terms of your
So this is, yeah, so this is really important when it comes back to what Eamon Howell has discussed in the past around understanding even the consumer and all those elements. So while you're making something, we're keeping the consumer in mind as well at the same time. Isn't that right, Jeff?
Absolutely. Every time here you're validating with your customer continually, and you're reiterating. So this is not just a one-step process. You could reiterate this 4 or 5 times based on the feedback from your customer.
Super. Thanks for that. So I think Eamon, are you due to, or Paul?
Yeah. Is
we on our next slide?
Phil?
Yeah, I'm here just waiting for our next slide. There we go.
Great. So I'm going to build on what Paul has said and give us some practical examples based on my experience in the realm of innovation. And first, I just want to endorse what Paul has said, because if you start Googling innovation, it's a tremendously diverse topic. And so I think the onus is on us is that we have to keep it simple to begin with, and that's a very simple process that Paul has outlined, and based on my experience, it's one that can work and will work. So I'm going to kick off. The slides are basically going to call out a key message. I'm going to talk to a practical example, as I mentioned, and I have a little quote on each slide, which I've tried to make as relevant to the topic that I'm discussing as possible, and maybe just flavor and color things a little bit in that regard. First point I want to talk about is creating an innovation culture. Again, a whole field in its own right. And this was one practical point that I had the fortune to experience where I worked last. I got exposure to a consultancy company called Breakthrough, which are operate on a worldwide level and very advanced operator, in my opinion, and some real value add if you ever wanted to look them up or Google them or whatever. Very expensive, so I don't think that they'll be going into every door. But the key point in terms of creating cultural innovation is really just that openness to ideas. And it might be yourself and your dog in terms of making up the company, or you may have a number of employees, but each of us have stakeholders, whether you're talking to a supplier, whether you're talking to customers, etc., in relation to ideas being proffered up. And all too often, myself definitely, and maybe other people on the call, have shut down ideas all too quickly before that they had the time to see the light of day, or before they got sufficient oxygen to move through the process that Paul has outlined. One of the ways that Breakthrough encouraged people to feedback in conversations, feedback on ideas, was not simply to go in. We're all prone to saying, this is what I don't like, this is why it's going to fail, this is why it's not going to work. And simply what is advocated is that you talk first about what you do like about the idea, what's working for you. Then you can go on, obviously, to add value in terms of what's not working yet, with the emphasis on the yet, because a lot of the issues can be resolved and tweaked and mocked up and demoed and so on and so forth. Is there anything missing in terms of the idea? If we only had this as another piece of Lego, or we had this as another value-added element to the proposition, maybe that would be the key to unlocking. And then finally, always look and kind of stretch the horizon in terms of what's possible. So have we come forward with an idea that's 6 out of 10, but really 8 or 9 is possible? So that's something that where I worked before adopted that feedback and kind of fostered a culture, fostered an approach, and put a mandate out there, really, that that's the way in which we would respond to ideas around product, around process, to move forward. Next slide, please. The second area I want to talk about is really just getting ahead of the customer consumer. And the example I wanted to talk about here was the eco range that I worked with about 12 months ago. We pushed this particular idea. And what the eco range in questions spoke to was all the various sustainable solutions. And where I work, we put a bay, 2 meters of these products. So 2 meters houses quite a number of these type of products. And we put it into about 100 stores. And ultimately, this particular portfolio of products was selling about €1,000 a week in each store on average. Now, the key point I want to make here is that when we launched that, it was a slow burn. But because the idea was ripe and had potential, it did take off over time. So it's about anticipating the consumer need, watching the consumer trends and so on and so forth, tapping into that, because you have to choose your time and your time to run in terms of the product and get out there quickly as you can and be ahead of that consumer. Otherwise, someone is going to usurp you. Equally importantly, I think, next slide please, is that you're conscious of not being too far ahead of the consumer. Because sometimes if you're waiting too long for a particular idea to trigger, it can cost you an awful lot of money in the meantime. And you just have to, I suppose, get the sweet spot in terms of when the demand is going to be there. Now, this may not be the best example because there could be a lot of people on the call saying dairy-free is absolutely working for me, but just 2 simple reference points. When we had the big snowstorm about, was it last February, 12 months? And then equally at the start of COVID when people stocked up. So there was a real pull on product through the whole market. And dairy-free was probably the product that was left most on the shelves when every other shelf in the place was clear. So the key point I'd make here is just to understand when the tidal wave of demand is going to come for a particular portfolio, and to be conscious of that sometimes you can, in fact, be a little bit ahead of the consumer. Sometimes your innovation may just not be registering with the consumer, and then you have the choice. Basically, throttle back on your resources, don't overinvest, don't put out the branding and the marketing and so on for too soon. Keep it particularly, and also on the flip side is back yourself and be patient if you feel that is going to come, and maybe sometimes you have to provoke and stimulate the demand. Next point, please. Mentioned many is the time, avoid the Me Too ranges. And this ties back to the quote that the second quote that Phil raised at the introduction of this particular section. If you don't have a clear USP, what is going to happen? In my opinion, 99% of the time, is that you may launch a brand, you launch it at, let's just say, €4 for the purpose of the conversation. And eventually, the big retailers are going to introduce an own brand alternative, or the discounters are going to come to town and they're going to basically put a product out at approximately half the price, because that's a simple rule of thumb, is that brands typically are twice the price of own brand or discounter brands. And if you don't have something where your brand credentials are strong enough, or that the product has a particular aspect or attribute that makes it different and better, then you could find yourself getting gazumped very significantly. And I would suggest anticipate that. So while you have the time when you're out there, because typically innovation works through the brands first, watch for the copycats coming in after you. Next, please. Avoid range proliferation. This is one that I unfortunately had a bad experience on. And the example I'm going to use here is summer eating range, where if you understand in barbecue season and so on and so forth, most of the sales, 90% of the sales, are back to a half a dozen products that we're all prone to buying. And I remember in my first year working this more than a decade ago, nothing would do me on to bring out new ranges and new ranges and new ranges and new ranges. And very quickly, the range that I was sponsoring at the time went from a range count of about 6 up to 50. And what it did is it divided my resources, it added cost, it hadn't the interest from the consumer. They were lovely products, but they just didn't have a proper business case behind them. And eventually what we did is we throttled the range back and concentrated on the core range. So I would encourage, and the other cliche here, if you go back to Apple, there's no surprise why Apple have so few SKUs. They whittle their innovation down. They don't cast their nets wide. It's a huge example or whatever, but it works in all types of industries, in all types of products, in all types of portfolios. Keep your range tight. Get your weighted rate of sale up, as I spoke about in the last webinar. Next, please. Consider the proposition end to end. And this really goes back to the demoing and so on and so forth. So just a simple example here. People will be familiar that the donut market would have been dominated by pretty standard stuff on the left-hand side of the page for many a year. And then recently we had the introduction of these donuts that had about 1,000 calories in them, that had about 15 different components. And they were launched with various donut houses around the country, particularly in the capital and so on and so forth. That's Cork, for any of you who are not from Cork. But the problem then is when they got adopted by the retailers, they couldn't be made easily in a mass market setting, because the products on the left-hand side are typically freeze-thaw and then brought in a box and so on and so forth, whereas the ones in the middle had to be all done by hand, and it didn't work in a mass market setting. They're doing fine with some specialists still. And then, lo and behold, you work to the right-hand side, and there's a practical kind of, I won't say piggy in the middle, but a practical solution that moves the game on from the left-hand side of the page, but didn't have all the issues, because the solution now was taught through end to end. So figure out your route to market, and just because you have a good product doesn't mean that it's going to fly. There are other aspects in terms of the total proposition. And again, please. If at first you don't succeed, just keep on trying. We launched ready meals, a kind of a value-added ready meal about a decade ago. But one of the things we made a mistake was we obligated the consumer to say, you buy a main meal for a £5, and then you must buy these 2 accompaniments for £2.50 each, and you get 3 for a tenner, and so on and so forth. And it didn't fly at the start because we just made it too complex for people. And eventually you strip it back and you say, main meal for a £5, and then you can buy any of these. You don't necessarily overcomplicate it. That's what we did at the time. The idea of itself was good, but the way in which we put it together as a solution for the consumer wasn't simple enough to cut through. So keep trying. And I like the quote here, which is fail forward. Don't be afraid of getting out there, demo. And just because the first 3 demos don't work doesn't mean you're not going to finally tweak the solution, some aspect of the product, the range, the price, or so on and so forth, and make it work. So tenacity is a real key attribute. And go again. This really brings back to what Paul has said. So while we're all prone to talking about the ideas, and sometimes the clouds and so on and so forth, and the entrepreneurship and so on and so forth, you must keep your feet on the ground. You must have a solid process and a solid business case backing this up. Otherwise, you could start to spend money and follow too many prototypes at a particular time. So groundedness is really, really key. 2 more slides, just very quickly. Back yourself. This particular example is a man who's known to me down in Clonakilty and his family. And they are so confident in what they do. They are so committed to what they do. And quite often there's detractors and people saying that's not going to work and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to, I suppose, borrow on the line, innovation survives only when people believe in their ideas. So drive on is the message from that. And one last slide, and finally, please, which is tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. You have to shout loud. At the start of the conversation, for those of you who are on the call, already talked about the importance of brand. And the Happy Pear is just a great example for me in relation to, if you strip back and look at the products in themselves, they're good. But it's much more than that. And people buy into the whole philosophy, the idea, etc. So you must tell your story, give yourself the time, step back from the coal face wherever and whenever you can, just to see where are you, take that helicopter view, and make sure that there's a narrative behind your product, your brand, and that people can buy into it, and that'll build trust, which is a really, really important word. Thank you. So back to Phil.
Cheers, Eamon. Thank you. That is, as always, just really, really insightful and simple and to the point. So thanks for that. One question for you, Eamon, is that how easy or difficult is it to, when people are at the start of a process for innovation and they have an idea, do you think it's is there any kind of key elements that make it easier for people to see that it might work at the very start through your experience?
I think that there's a couple of points that spring immediately to mind. The biggest chance of succeeding is if the consumer need or want or desire, but I like the word need, is being fulfilled. And on that, one of the things that I found particularly beneficial was getting out there, because in the businesses that people on the call are operating, sometimes you can get sucked into the four walls. You're either on the production floor, or you're in the office, or you're on the call, or you're in front of the goddamn computer doing webinars and all of this. And so I think get out there and understand what's moving and shaping in the market. And on that, Phil, I've been lucky in the past that I've been quite a far away in terms of US and Canada and Sweden and places like that. And they're very what they call dynamic marketplaces. But from a practical perspective and closer to home, that's much more attainable for everyone on the call, is I think there's two great markets that you should get out and see, if you can at all, when COVID abates and when the flights are back up and running. And that is Holland and London, because they are very, very dynamic. And when you walk the streets in the particular food areas, be it street food or be it serving the convenience market all around Canary Wharf and so on and so forth, or in the various places like Amsterdam or the key cities in Holland, you will get an understanding of what that consumer needs are in relation to food and food solutions, I feel. So my practical advice is get out there and see what's happening on the ground.
No, I think that's
Sorry,
great advice.
One other thing I meant to say, I was just hunting for it there, is most of the brilliant ideas that I've seen start with the specialists. They start with the singular operators, be it a donut house, be it a pizzeria, be it a vegan shop or whatever. And I think getting out and into those as opposed to necessarily into the mass market retailers, because most of the brilliant ideas are starting in the small places.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Insightful as always, Eamon, and thank you very much. Your last slide here is about telling your story and shouting loud. And I think, to be fair, our next presenter is an absolute expert at telling her story. We're absolutely delighted to have Lorraine Heskin here this morning. And I had the good fortune of listening and hearing from Lorraine at various presentations over the last number of years. I think, personally, Lorraine, I think you're inspirational because you do such a great job, tough environment in the world of food, operating at the level you are. I think you do have this fabulous USP in terms of that nutritional element, as well as offering great food and service. But I do think that is a lovely, lovely element, because when you link that back to the food trends, which we discussed at the start of the call around Board BIA, I think your connectivity is super. And I also love the fact that when you speak, you mention your mentoring and you mentioned your parents and all that good elements. So they're all the private board members who often don't get mentioned in these businesses, but they're very, very important for our own self-motivation. So without further ado, we're looking forward to hearing your personal journey. So over to you.
Thanks. Wow. Thanks very much, Phil. That's very kind of you. And it's a real pleasure for me to be here today. And thank you very much for asking me to be here. I'm always delighted to talk about the journey that Gourmet Food Parlour has been on since its establishment in 2006. I'm very proud of it. And I'm very proud to be navigating the path, particularly this year throughout 2020, which has been so difficult for every business, no matter who they are. So for those of you who don't know who I am, or don't know what my business is, I'll talk about that very, very quickly. My main focus really for my discussion today is to talk about, I suppose, how I have managed the business throughout the last 7 or 8 months, and what I have done to, I suppose, keep things standing and keep things ticking along. So Gourmet Food Parlour was created in 2006. I moved back from the States, where I'd spent many years working over there, and I was always had a passion to have a business of my own, a food business. And at the time, Ireland was absolutely thriving in what was called the Celtic Tiger times. And every landlord in Dublin, you know, if you think of those doors slamming shut in front of you, that is exactly what happened, until I met one man who gave me a chance to open a very, very, very small cafe on a side street, off a side street in Dunleary. And boy, was I excited. I was so excited to get that opportunity from somebody to be able to start my dream. And started I did. And I opened a cafe, 25-seater cafe in 2006. And pre-COVID, I had close to 300 staff, 10 locations, plus a catering and event business. What was the unique selling points that Phil has spoken about? But what I would say Gourmet Food Parlour is it's an Irish-owned, Irish-run, and a very passionate Irish business that really has an amazing connection with Irish suppliers, creating jobs and creating a fun atmosphere for customers to come in and enjoy some really good food. So we have restaurants, we operate takeaway, and we also have a presence in some businesses in Dublin as well. That was all pre-COVID. So basically we'd have like a kind of a Gourmet Food Parlour Express kiosk, and that was developed over the years, fundamentally from the existing brand that was created. I also have a catering and event business, which I'm really proud of, which covers everything from corporate catering to events and weddings, and we also specialise in sports nutrition. I'd like to claim that I was feeding the Cork footballers when they scored that goal last weekend, but I can't claim that now. But I can claim to have we're the official food partners of Dublin GAA for the last 9 years, so we're not doing too badly. We work with Leinster Rugby, and we've just been appointed the contract with Hockey Ireland, which is an amazing coup for us over the last few weeks and months. So there's a lot of strands to our bow. And I suppose one of the things, and I really enjoyed all the speakers this morning so far and what everybody has said, because there's so many messages that come clear for me as a business owner. And they are, number one, believe in yourself and believe in what you're doing. If you believe in your business and you believe in your brand, people will see that, and that will exude from you, and people will pick up on that. The confidence has to come from within. And if you've created something that's pretty special, it doesn't have to be something complicated. It can be something very simple, like serving food, like creating some good food. People will see that from you, and they will take that from you, and you can't underestimate the value of that belief in yourself and that passion and that want to survive within your brand. There's a lot of other things. I mean, being organized and also having a massive confidence and plan in your business. And definitely, I have been majorly challenged over the last 9 months. I'll never forget March the 15th as long as I live. And I go back to what I call COVID lockdown number 1. And that was when I closed down the business, and I made the decision on a Sunday at 6 p.m. to close the business down. And this was before the government had given any indication that any businesses should be closed down at the time. But what I could see, and it is this business sense that you have within yourself, I could see that consumers were nervous, staff was nervous, it was a nervous environment. My sales, which I'll go back to what Richie's points were, I monitor my sales every single day. Daily I monitor my sales, weekly I analyse the business, and I was coming into 2020 with lots of very strong plans, short and medium plans. However, the previous 4 weeks, I could see my sales targets, which I was reaching before the nervousness set in, starting to dip, and my sales were coming down 30-40%. So I knew at that stage the business was going to be closed at one stage. So I made that decision there and then to close, and I don't regret that decision. It was definitely the right thing to do. And having that sense, and even knowing, that this is the right thing that I needed to do was a difficult decision to make, to be quite honest, because I had to make 99% of my staff temporarily redundant. And as a mom, as a wife, as a business owner, no matter who I am or what I do, making that decision was not easy. And you're ultimately taking people who are earning quite a decent wage and salary, and you're forcing them to go on to a lower amount, and that's not something that you want to that you want to do. But ultimately, I wanted the business to survive. And actually, if I think back on it, because it was so unknown, and I look back on it now, I was frightened. I didn't know if Gourmet Food Parlour was going to survive throughout that, because ultimately I look at what my cash flow was in my bank. I know what all my bills are coming in. I know what my rents are. I know what I'm due to pay to the revenue. And you'd go into what I call is fight or flight mode. Your body tells you, okay, you have to protect yourself. You put this layer over yourself, and it's not myself by saying that, I mean the business, and I mean the 300 staff that I have had working with me. And I've had staff work with me for 14 years who came in the very first day and who are still with me, you know, and I have a protection against them, for them. And I also have a responsibility to pay my bills. And so, you know, it was very, very, very challenging, and definitely one of the most challenging things in my life so far. But look, ultimately, I made some strong decisions, and I reopened the business 2 weeks later as a drive-through, because I was nervous. You know, I was nervous about this. You know, I was nervous about COVID and what could it do to staff. And you know, we had very little knowledge about it at the time. So one of the things that I've done over the last couple of years is I've invested heavily in systems. So systems that will enable and help me to be a lot stronger in terms of my knowledge of the day-to-day running of the business. And one of the things that I put an awful lot of merit in is training, and I invested in a system called Flow. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's a Scottish online system, and basically my team can go home in the evening and they can go online and they can get training in different modules. So what I did instantly was we went to Flow. And Flow created these modules for us to train the staff in on the health and safety systems around COVID and how to protect yourself, protect your colleagues, protect the restaurant. How do we build up the restaurant in such a way that I can actually have chefs working within 2 meters of each other? Because it is down to the scientific facts of all that. You know, you don't want to have, at the time, you couldn't have any chefs crossing over. They needed to wear masks. They needed, like, sections needed to have 2 meters. And I'm very lucky that my kitchens were big enough to enable me to do that. But these are all the smaller decisions that sound small now, but they were huge decisions at the time. And collectively, by deciding on what I needed to do, it gave me the strength and the confidence to know that I could continue on, and I could actually say, you know what? I can open for takeaway, and I mightn't have an online service yet, but by God, I'm going to have it, and let's go. And I've done this for the last 14 years, and I'm not going to let Gourmet Food Parlour just fade into the background. Even if I turn over 5,000 a week, it doesn't matter what it is. I have to do it. I have to do it for myself, for the business, and for the jobs, and for our customers who've been so loyal and have been coming in and out of the restaurants for 14 years. There's so many amazing things, and it would have been very easy for me to say, right, put the laptop down now, and sure, I'll take 3 months off, and sure, that'd be great. But you can't do that, really. Ultimately, you have to say to yourself, I stand up and I will fight for absolutely everything that I have worked for over the last 14 years, and we keep it going, you know. So we opened as a takeaway again, and it was like building everything from scratch, you know. It was just, let's start all over again. And yeah, we decided to open up Santry as a takeaway, which is actually very funny because we were so, like, kind of a little bit old-fashioned about it and very particular. Because if someone would call us up and say, can I order, and I'm going to collect my order at 12:15, I'd say, great. So what car are you driving? Is it a white Lada or whatever it is? And then we dropped the bag into the passenger seat. And ultimately, what was so important about all of that, though, was that we could see that customers missed us, you know, and the demand for the brand, which I always talk about. I'm very proud of Gourmet Food Parlour and the brand that it has, the brand, I suppose, identity that it has evolved and developed over the last few years. Is incredible, and it's the consumers, it's my customers who continuously remind me of that, and my team who, you know, going back to even saying believing in yourself, I believe also that you surround yourself with good people and surround yourself with people who are almost as better than you, you know. So
yeah. And if you were, you know, there's a lot of business owners, as we said, we've entrepreneurs listening in this morning, we've people who are at, you know, 5-6 million turnover and bigger amounts of money. No different to yourself, Lorraine. I mean, what you're saying this morning is incredibly inspirational. I get kind of goosebumps listening to you, because I think it's certainly, it's brilliant. I can personally associate a number of elements, obviously not to the same level of pressure you had, and I think your decision making is phenomenal. You know, what would you be saying to people out there right now that are just struggling? You know, no different to, you've had hindsight and great support. Certainly there's people out there, family businesses, that are struggling. You know, some people have pulled down the shutters in the last few weeks due to the latest restrictions. But what would you be saying to them if you could give them that little bit of a lift to motivation? What would you share with them?
Well, you know what, when you're struggling, the most important thing, I think, is to try and speak to somebody else, you know, who can help you, or who can understand that struggle that you're going through. Because ultimately, it's very, very difficult for businesses who think that they're not going to reopen again. I mean, that is absolutely heartbreaking. We all know the blood, sweat and tears that we put into our businesses, and to think that it cannot reopen again would actually make me very emotional, to be honest, because I know the stress and the strain that's behind running a business, and to think that because of something that you didn't have any cause of is going to close your business down is actually very hard to get your head around. So you need to speak to somebody. I honestly believe, like, I love speaking to business mentors, or even like counselors, you know, anyone that you can go to that can help you on your journey, or even other business owners that you maybe see are paving the way, or they're getting through it, and ask them how did they do it. Because, you know, I think by speaking to people, it will give you a lot of inspiration, and it might give you that little bit of an extra idea as to what you can do. And one of the things that I did over the last few weeks as well, as I looked at my business and I said, okay, here it is. This is what I've been doing for 14 years. The world as we know it is never going to be the same again. So what is happening out there right now that I can maybe tweak my business to make it happen? And this is the same for businesses who are struggling. You could think, okay, I've had a business, customers have loved it. So what can I do now to maybe change it in a certain way, so that, you know, customers will continue to come back to me if I can reopen, or if I can move it in a different direction. So I created another brand within my brand called Gourmet Gifts, and it's a website where I work with all Irish suppliers, and I source some beautiful products, and basically I make them into a nice hamper box. It's gourmetgifts.ie, to give a little plug on it there. And you know, and I also, and what it is you can go online, you can build your own basket. So you can take beautiful hand soaps and creams. We're going to bring in jewellery and pot. We're going to bring in lots of different small Irish producers, and I want to be able to work with them and support them. And we're working on developing that. There's lots of, obviously, loads of yummy Irish foods and great wines and Irish beers and stuff like that. So we've been working on that for the last 6 or 7 weeks, and we just launched it last Friday week. So
I know there's one or two people want to ask you a few questions. Our chat has gone bananas since you've come on, which is brilliant, because loads of people are looking for questions to ask. Can I just ask you one question from a family point of view, or from your own point of view? How do you motivate yourself? How do you motivate the guys at home? How do you manage that pressure at home? You know.
Oh yeah, that's a brilliant question. Well, my husband also works for himself, so we have a great unit, in that we both understand what the other person needs to do to get it over the line. I have 3 kids, 10, 8, and 5, and they're great. They're nearly motivation in itself, and you know what? I work a little bit from home. I'm out and about with the team a lot, and I juggle things as I need to, so nobody gets left out. But there's some days that are easier than others, Phil. I'm not going to lie about it, but most of the time it works great. But it takes a while to find that actual balance, you know, so you don't have the mom guilt. But I have a good balance at the moment, so we'll keep it going.
I thought it was us dads suffered from that guilt.
No.
Lorraine? Hi, Lorraine, I have a question for you there. You referred to it at the start of the conversation in terms of your understanding of your USP, your brand. Due to the passage of time, particularly over the last 6 months, has your understanding of what makes your business different and better evolved now?
That's a really good question. I'm very, very strong on what I know. I suppose the fundamentals of the strengths of the business, I'm very strong in the knowledge of that. So, I mean, what I would do an awful lot, Eamon, is, so I would run reports every Monday as to what my best-selling items are. And I've tweaked the business very much so, even over the last 12 months, based on what the consumer demands are. And ultimately, I would love the consumer demands to be just salads all the time, but that is not what the customers want. So it's basically looking at that. And I think the food business changes all the time. I mean, you know, you talk about, even in any business, you have to be 10 steps ahead of yourself. You have to be constantly evolving. And for me in hospitality, like social media, the digital platforms are absolutely huge. And you need to be so in tune with that. You need to be continuously updating and upgrading yourself. So I think for me, feel like I want to push the business to be different and to be more online, because I see that's where it's going. And we are online now. You can order our food online for the last couple of months. But it has changed a lot in the last 12 to 18 months. There's no doubt about it. And even though there's a great trend for vegan and a great trend for healthier, the bulk and the majority of the sales that I generate within the restaurant side now is the non-healthier items, which blows my mind, but that's the way it is. So, yeah.
Nimble really is the key point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's very interesting, actually, and it's really interesting when you look at the statistical analysis behind the sales and the dishes, you know, per because we're one of the very few food businesses in Ireland that are open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and for takeaway and delivery, and we offer catering. So as a food business, we have an awful lot of strings to our bow, and the marketing challenge to that is how do you promote it all. And how do you make sure you cover all the bases to try and make sure that you're not diluting everything, but you're getting the messages across to the consumer? That's always a big challenge.
Brilliant.
I had another point. Does anyone else want to come in, maybe?
No, I'm actually going to manage our time because I'm very conscious that we have a schedule of events, and I want to make it. I want to hit the timeline as best as possible. We are going to run over by approximately about 10 minutes just to manage everybody's clock. So, Lorraine, firstly, can I thank you? Absolutely inspirational as always. I know when people get the replay of this video, they're going to be glued to it. So, thank you for that.
No problem. My pleasure. Thanks very much,
it's going to
Phil.
be really good. All right, and really, hopefully you'll stay with us. You might have a few questions for us later. Our next speaker, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Vice Admiral Mark Mellett, head of the Irish Defence Forces. Mark, absolutely thrilled that you could be here. I've had the good fortune of listening to you on a number of occasions, and you have always spoken with passion, honesty, integrity, and empathy. And I think that's a huge part, is just your approach. So I'm really looking forward to, Mark, to hearing from you and your principles and how to build culture within businesses, etc. And I appreciate you coming at this through different lenses, but I certainly think there's a benchmark between your amazing role and what you do in your organisation for us to take some sound bites from.
So listen, I'm just listening there to Lorraine and say, what a hospital pass. Yeah, brilliant presentation, Lorraine. And also, I really was intrigued by the contributions from everybody else. But I think, I suppose the link, just to start on that, and before I say I feel like an imposter because I'm in a completely different business, I think it was one of the points I think Lorraine touched on, you know, what do you do in terms of a difficult position? You talk to others, you get advice, you get perspectives from others, you get it from mentors or from friends or from your network. And really, that's the reason I love engaging in events like this, because I always come away with a million ideas. And some of your earlier speakers there have given me some great food for thought that I'm going to roll back into our own planning framework. But at its most basic, I suppose, to try and join a link between the two of us, we're both in businesses that have risk and have security challenges. And whether it's an enterprise or whether it's the security of the state, where we are, that's our role. And I'm glad to say, and I'm very proud of the men and women in the Defence Forces, we're the most trusted public service unit in the state. You know, over the years, we've stood up to violent extremists. We've freed hostages. In recent years, we've rescued over 20,000 people in the Mediterranean. We've seen huge challenges. We've seen hundreds of people die. We've recovered many bodies, and that's all in the pointed side of our operation. But it's most fundamental, I suppose, in terms of the business side. We are the bedrock of our state sovereignty and the right to live in a civil society, and that framework we provide for a civil society is a human right of every man, woman and child. And it's where people are free, where the institutions of a state function: health, education, transport, and where the vulnerable are protected. But most of all, it's also where enterprise thrives. And that's the point of connection, where I say state security is inextricably linked with economic security. And I think, Phil, when you asked me, you know, would I engage in this? And I said, absolutely, because it's essential for us to create an environment where enterprise can thrive. But it's also essential for us to be able to do our job that enterprise can thrive, because if we don't have a vibrant economy, we don't have the wherewithal to provide for the institutions of the state, so we all can do good things. And in recent months, for the last 7 months, and I was just thinking about Lorraine's point with regards to back in March, we were in the space a few months before that, and I was really worried about looking at the COVID advance coming from Asia and what did it mean. And it really was ringing alarm bells for us in the context of how would we prepare for that. And we had to start looking. And I remember, saying, I put a joint operation planning group together. I said, I've got a bad feeling about this virus. And that was back in January. And in February, I put together I suppose the basis for a joint interagency task force that we stood up, and that stood up in March. And it has been on the go since then. And our women and men have been delivering tracing, testing, tentage, transporting, and supporting the HSE in terms of trying to deal with this battle around the COVID virus. But more recently, in the last few months, what I've started to do now is look at the issue of some people call it new normal, but I've actually put plan ahead teams and say, let's plan for the better normal, because there is obviously going to be a new future. But why should we look at it as just being new? Why don't we look at it as being better? And there's a huge amount of learning that we've all gathered from this so far. But I suppose the critical piece, and one of the reasons I kind of am passionate about things is the whole issue of the complexity of the world we live in. It has never been more complex, and a lot of that is linked to, I think, the information age we are in. And I think 400 years ago, John Donne said, "No man is an island entire to itself. Each is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away, Europe is the less." And the key message he was making in that is that we are all interdependent. And there's never been a time like now where we are more interdependent. And whether it's at state level or international governmental level, it's that principle of multilateralism, of collaborating, is the only foundation in which we're going to deal with some of the challenges we have, like climate change, biodiversity loss. It has to be that multilateral framework. And that's what worries me sometimes in terms of the evidence that's there in some cases, in some states, with regards to a drive towards unilateralism or almost a kind of a selfishness in engagement. And bringing it back to us in terms of this forum here, and a lot of talk there on innovation, that's the driver for innovation for me, that in a world whereby the rate of change is so fast, the reality is that increasingly the answers to our challenge and problems lie outside our organizational boundary. And the hedge for that is to network, is to actually have an engagement with others. In the first instance, an engagement with others who are in the same business as you. And that's where you get your open source innovation, where you can exchange ideas. And I always say there's enough in this for everybody. So the idea of actually, well, I'm going to keep my ideas to myself and I'm not going to share my ideas. I say go the opposite way. Actually have a network where it's open and you're quite open to sharing your ideas. And the reciprocity you'll get from those you work with in terms of them sharing your ideas with you, it means that you'll have a force multiplying effect and you'll have that change that actually will continue to enhance and evolve. And I remember making a point on innovation a number of years ago when I was head of the Navy, and somebody came back to me and he said, "Oh, but we've always been innovating." And I said, actually he's right. We have always been innovating, but we've been innovating from within the closed silo of the naval service. What I'm talking about is open innovation, whereby you create a network around you of like-minded organizations. And if you're really brave, you create a network of disparate groupings, different types of business, different types of enterprise. You learn the language of others. And that's when you get your disruptive innovation, whereby it's that curveball coming in from another perspective that you never considered, because you may have been guilty in the past of groupthink, or you're always looking at similar ideas to the same problem and never changing. So that brings me on to the diversity of your network is something critical. Which brings me to another point then, that is actually not just looking at the diversity of your network in terms of externally, but look internally. What's the mix in your team? What diversity is in your team? And diversity is not just about the mix of tech and line. It's also about culture. It's about creed. It's about generation. Wrinkly old admirals talking to the Generation X or Generation Y, learning the language of others, so that you actually have that ability to communicate and take those perspectives. And I think to listen and not to dismiss. Actually, it is just extraordinary. I remember once I had a young female PhD who commented on something of how we run our ships. She was in a research community in UCC. And I said, how come she has a view on that I never thought about in my life? And I had 30 years service. And she suggested something that actually was a game changer about how we go about patrolling on ships. And it was a eureka moment for me. And I said, I looked at my organization, 94% male, 6% female. And I said, it's a gender piece. She has looked at this from a different perspective to me. So the diversity piece is also about gender and empowerment of women in organizations like ours. So it's an area, when you look at it even beyond just in terms of your organization, one of the biggest drivers of interstate and intrastate violence is actually the gender gap. And that's, statistically there, when you compare gender gap with things like the Global Peace Index, it's remarkable, the correlation between it. So when you roll that back up to state, you have to look at trying to ensure that gender gap is not an issue in terms of your organization. And right now for us, it's a capability issue that we need to address.
I think, Mark, you hit a really, really important point there, is for a lot of the smaller industries that are there at the moment, and they're struggling, and they have a little bit of groupthink going on. They're, as Lorraine said, under a bit of pressure with the finances, the numbers, all that. But it is about, as you've rightly said, getting the network going, getting different people involved. Eamon Howell mentioned it earlier on this morning, having an outside voice coming in and poking and prodding a little bit with your thought process. And I think having that gender balance is absolutely paramount in just creating a better, if I could use the word, recipe for success, because I think it's really, really important. And I don't think it's one secret ingredient. I think it's a combination of all the elements being involved. I think in what you've said there, because everything you've mentioned in terms of embracing the innovation, how we build our networks, the inclusion, I think that's all key, along with the actual empowerment, as you rightly said, giving people the opportunity and
and
creating the right environment,
Yeah, and I suppose another point that I would say, and it's watch out for the egos. I have a thing about egos, and I find them, they can be very disruptive, and they're often associated with silos in bigger organizations, whereby they have little fiefdoms and it's their way or the highway. But in fact, if I go back to my opening point about collaboration and multilateralism, there is no room for egos. Egos and silos undermine trust, efficiency, and effectiveness, and you can't be in the business of competing with teammates. You're either on the same team or you won't have that, I suppose, synergy between the various business units within the overall enterprise. So, but I think somebody failing forward. I think I don't know who said that earlier on, but the issue with regards to being willing, Eamon, you did be willing to take risks, and opportunities come to pass, not to pause. And the issue on leadership side is trying to, we have a thing called mission command in the military, whereby you try and devolve a level of autonomy to the lowest level. It's a principle of subsidiarity. So people are empowered to actually make decisions. And when they make decisions, hopefully they get it right. But if they get it wrong, you have to have, I suppose, you have to have a co-acceptance of risk. You can't devolve and enable people, and then when something goes wrong, blame people. You have to be in the business of the trust culture and say, okay, that didn't work. Let's look at the learning from it, and then mitigate into the future. And what do you call it? Is a trust culture. So people straight away say, I've actually had a screw up here. It didn't go the way I wanted it to go. I thought I'd pull this off. And say, fine, great, but let's look at the learning, capture the learning, and the next time it happens again, the chances are it'll go the right direction. So I suppose there's another point on resilience too, and I think some of your speakers have spoken about that point. And the thing about, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges facing us all, is the issue of stress. It's kind of a new disease that's actually charging in like a blizzard. Everybody is experiencing it, and a lot of that is associated with the information age, with access all the time in terms of social media, in terms of all kinds of media. Everybody has a view. Everybody has a view on your business. Those who have absolutely no responsibility or accountability, they'll still have a view and it can be very frustrating. And the issue is to actually be able to step back, build your own, I suppose, protections for that, and don't bother and don't mind them. Just keep on going the way you feel is the right way to go.
Mark, Paul Ward here. What top tips would you have for supporting innovation within an organization?
Yeah, I would think, well, first of all, you do need an innovation strategy at some stage. I don't think you have to start off, and have an absolute, ramen of innovation strategy. And the issue is about empowering people to be innovative. I have a scheme of the Chief of Staff's Innovation Awards. And, in the last few weeks, we had the decisions on that, and we brought in Enterprise Ireland, and we bought in a company, Butler Technology, and they've come in with us to support that. And we had nearly 80 individuals participated in that out of the organization. So to reward innovation, but also to put it in as a requirement in the context of your business plans. And I have a requirement that I want every part of our organization, all the sub-elements, to have at least one innovation that they can actually pursue in their annual plan. So it's creating and not looking for perfection, but enabling an environment where innovation can happen.
That's a key element, isn't it? Just enabling them and empowering them to take on the progression, I suppose, of innovation. Is that it? Yeah. Absolutely.
And you have to discuss. I mean, I think in your opening few words, there is so much written about innovation that people actually become jaded with it. But it's really just about accepting, in a world whereby things are changing so fast, that in open source, through this means, if you go on Google anything to do with your business, you'll find 1,000 of ideas relating to what you do for free. You don't have to pay for it. And what you have to do then is be discerning to decide, okay, what's helpful for me in this? So that's the beauty of open source. It's and it's also accepting that because things are changing so fast, new ways of doing things have a shorter half-life. So that means that things are actually become outdated more quickly. So you have to continually remain on your guard for the next breakthrough in your area or the next opportunity in your area. You can't get into a comfort zone and say, I've arrived, I've solved it, it's sorted. Absolutely not, because you will be overwhelmed pretty soon.
And Mark, that leads us on to a question which is around values and valuing people. If you think of it, to try and encourage people to go and look, research, support the organization. How or what have you seen has been a great way to support that encouragement of people driving the values of what you want to achieve from the organization?
Yeah, well, I think for us, and our values go back nearly 100 years to the foundation of Oak Dignahearn back in 1913. But the same values are there today: moral courage, physical courage, respect, integrity, loyalty, and selflessness. They're the foundation on which we do our business. I say values are not about perfection, but they are about commitment. And we actually have institutionalized these values from the point of view of, first of all, our value champions. Every year I ask for our personnel in our organization to look around and see who best epitomizes each of those values. And I get citations in, hundreds of citations in, from the men and women of the organization nominating their peers for being the exemplar. The second thing is the values in action. When we do our plans, we try and action our values in those plans. So there's not a question of just a framework that sits on a notice on a wall. Actually, we try and action them the way we do our business. So the issue is about values in action, as opposed to just talking about values and then setting them aside. So we have our Value Champions Award. Last year, President Michael D. Higgins presented those awards in Oris, and I'm hoping that this year, I understand we won't be able to do it in Oris, but we'll find some mechanism, I hope, because we've already just recently accepted our Value Champions. And just a simple example, there's a girl, Jenny O'Sullivan, who was one of our Value Champions. And I remember she got the Value Award for selflessness, nominated by her peers. And I remember ringing her up and saying to Jenny, this chief of staff here, you have been nominated for the Value Award. And she started crying. And when she'd finished, and she said, surely somebody deserves this more than me. And that's exactly, what values are about, is that, a continuous selflessness with regards to the organisation. And she was a great exemplar of that.
And that's, even that alone, having an award for selflessness is lovely. It's absolutely, I think, to be fair to, and I've commented to Lorraine Heskin in the past there, she's, like your good self, very supportive of others out there. And I'd say to both of you this morning, you're very, very good, you're very considered in reaching out to others, whether it be through social media, etc. And I've seen others here on the call. That's why we put together a special group of people, because everybody here is more giving in their nature and trying to support. And I think, to be fair to Skillnet, they're also trying to do their bit, and they're creating the platform for us to share some of the insights. So I think it's just it's a great culmination this morning. On the final piece, Mark, if you were to say about leaders or enabling them, how would you say to SMEs this morning? What guidance would you get them to consider?
Well, I think you have to be enabling. I think people, and whether it's the youngster who's just come into your business, or whether it's a more senior, people need to be given a freedom to get on within a left and right. So we call it mission command, and I use the word autonomy, and enable as much as possible. But people are not going to come all of a sudden with all the knowledge. But so therefore you have to give the supporting, and you have to give the coaching as well. And now and again, you have to give the direction. Even I remember preparing for the COVID side, people in my organization didn't quite see it the way I saw it. But my view was, we have to be here at the end, and we have to have an architecture at the start that is actually going to survive through that. And there were, people were, in some cases, not as were. I remember once saying to somebody, I said, what part of the order do you not understand? So that was the directing side. But come back, in the main, it's about enabling, and it's about autonomy. And there's a lovely line from American philosopher Mary Parker Follett, and she said, leadership is not so much about the exercise of power, but it's about that capacity to create that sense of power in those who are led. The real role of a leader is to create more leaders. So that's I think the real way is to enable people to be leaders in the way that you want the organization to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. That lovely saying, to pass it forward and pass it back. I think it's that getting that balance right, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Listen, it's been incredibly insightful, and I know you're pressed for time, but we do have a couple of questions which have come in on the chat. I know some of the panel members here would also like to ask a few questions, so I'm not too sure who'd like to go first. I suppose, Richie, I know you wanted to ask a question. You're just on mute, Rich.
Yeah.
Great.
Sorry, Mark. I suppose just one question really on and this is a personal one. One thing I picked up from Lorraine's presentation, and I omitted it from my 5 things to do, was I totally forgot about digital platforms. So that's something that goes into my next presentation. But in terms of managing a business, is it important to be a delegator? Is it important to be an enforcer, or a mix of both?
I would say I'm back to the mission command. I'm trying to enable and delegate as much as I can, because it's simply on that principle that things are changing so fast. If you are, an automaton, or you're actually looking for people to come back up and look for permission to do this or that, the opportunity is gone. So you have to delegate as much as you can, so people can seize those fleeting opportunities and harness them. And and then you have to share the risk, which is if they get it wrong, you can't throw them under the bus. You can't throw them under the bus. Share the risk, because that's the price for delegation and giving autonomy.
I don't. And that's absolutely 100%, isn't it? You have to share the risk. That's what it's about. Bridie, you.
It's more feedback, really, just to say that I found this absolutely fantastic from both Lorraine and Mark, just listening. The things I've picked up are networking, the power of networking. That is what that the SkillNet networks are about. We're trying to bring all the parts together to help everybody. I don't know if anybody's been watching The Queen's Gambit about the chess player. It's fictional, but in that it shows when she's going to play chess in Russia, how the Russians are actually working together, even though they're chess masters, chess, uber people. Behind the scenes, they network and they share together. They go over the moves, they look at the opposition, they look at everything. Whereas coming from America, in this Queen's Gambit Netflix serial, she was working in isolation on her own. And I think the power of just what you've said about understanding the language of others, the diversity, the culture, the gender gap, and innovation is about doing something a little bit different or something that's new. It's not about this sudden massive thing. And people do get hung up on that. So I just wanted to say those things because, they're stuck in my throat. They brought a tear to my eye. And I just thought this was fabulous. And particularly to, Richard and to Paul and to Eamon, who have been here through the last 3 sessions and are giving us such fantastic insights about data, finance, customer, brand, and how to take a product from the start, from conception in Paul's model through to the prototyping and testing. This is very rich and very deep, fantastic information. So on behalf of Taste for Success, we're very proud to have you here and thank you. So I'll mute my mic.
Thank you, Bridie.
Thanks very much,
Bridie.
Bridie.
I know Paul Ward has to go, and I know we're all time pressured. I know that Eamon, you have a question there, Eamon. I'm sure that you'd.
Yeah, can you hear me? I have a question for Mark in relation to Mark. For those either on the call or maybe beyond the call, because I'm sure your video will travel. Any advice for companies who are particularly negatively impacted by COVID?
Yeah, well, first of all, I feel an imposter to advise companies who have been really heavily impacted by COVID, because we in the Defence Forces have carried on to do our business, and I really have huge sympathy. And I was listening to Lorraine and her perspective on that, and the only thing is, turn the adversity into the opportunity. And if there is a means to actually get what I call the plan ahead teams, and we use them here in the Defence Forces, we're planning ahead to a better future. There has to be an opportunity, I feel, to actually plan ahead for this better future in the context of your particular enterprise. And that's about, looking at what changes can I make, against the lack of actually business to land in a position when things change that are actually going to make me more structured and more powerful. And I think also to use the open source, there is I think on the innovation side, the difficulty with innovation often is we don't have time to actually look at what others are doing. This is perhaps the time to actually gather that information. But I have to be, put my vulnerability here and say that I feel like an imposter to suggest to businesses hit by COVID.
Super. I listen. I'm just conscious of everybody else's time. In summary, I want to thank everybody from Roisin O'Shea, who's with us from the start of the webinars. Eamon, to yourself, brilliant insights. To Paul Ward and BIM, amazing contribution. Richie Healy from Rex Consulting, thank you, Richie. Lorraine, thank you for just more and more insightful motivation, and I just want to genuinely say thank you to you personally, but also on behalf of all the SMEs tuned in this morning. Mark, to your good self, I've had the good fortune to listen to you on a few occasions, and again, it's been brilliant just listening to you, because you really just bring it back to the reality of why we're all here. So I just want to say thank you for that, and to Bridie and to the Taste for Success SkillNet team, thank you for your support, and for the SME sector and the food manufacturing businesses out there. So thank you to you all, and I wish you well, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you very much.
And thanks to Trained In, absolutely, for hosting us today.
For hosting us on this platform.
Okay,
Thank
to
you so
Sorka.
much.
Thank you, Trained In. Cheers, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.